You're listening to Live Wild with me, Hilary Rose. This is the podcast that invites you to think and possibly even live outside the box. In this episode, I speak to Maggie Molloy from Cheap Irish Houses. Cheap Irish Houses is an RTE show that takes a look at an often neglected segment of the housing market. Maggie has this lovely infectious energy which I find really inspiring. She has a no-nonsense, get-things-done attitude, and her practical approach to housing may be just what we need at this time.
Planners in Ireland don't look favourably on those little cabins, but yet they're an affordable way of getting a house. Like if it's 200,000 minimum to put a house on a plot of land, right? So that's like a block-built house. And it's maybe 25,000, 30,000 for someone to come in and put a cabin on it in 3 days. And all you have to do is have your foundations put on. Are you telling me that would not solve something, you know? And we have all these arguments about how, they don't suit the vernacular and they're not an indigenous building type in Ireland. And you're like, you're letting all the vernacular buildings go. You're not even trying to save them. So like, I would rather see cabins, honestly, that young people could afford than monstrosities of like mock Georgian 6-bedroom houses that don't really actually honour our legacy as Irish people. They're just kind of very colonial kind of buildings, and it would be lovely to just see young people, get into houses. I'm at a stage now where I'm like, do we start trailer parks?
We chat about our love of old houses, making them fit a modern life, nostalgia, rural repopulation, and doing it all on a budget. You can find out more on cheapirishhouses.com or on Insta at cheapirishhouses. I hope you enjoy the show. Maggie Molloy from Cheap Irish Houses, thank you so much for joining me today. And I have to say, firstly, thank you for providing this service that you provide, because I have been obsessed with Cheap Irish Houses and Cheap Irish properties for the last decade. They've been my little pet project. And I was so happy to see, first of all, I found you on Instagram. I was so happy to see your Instagram feed, which then turned into a TV show and multi-platform. Thank you, because if you didn't do it, I would have had to do it at some point. So you've taken the burden away from me.
It's nice to know I would have had someone to step in, you know, if I hadn't done it.
I don't think I could have done as a comprehensive job as you have done. It's amazing. Congratulations on the TV show and everything. And I think it's really vital work, particularly in housing situations that people find themselves in. So for those who don't know what Cheap Irish Houses is and don't have a clue what we're talking about, can you fill us in, please?
Sure. It started out originally as just a little hobby where when I was travelling between my house in Tipperary and where I'm from in Wexford, I would see all these little derelict houses on the way, and one year you'd go past and maybe it would have a roof, the next year you go past it wouldn't have a roof, and the next year there'd be a bungalow or just a green field. So I'm really invested in that kind of, it's really the houses for me kind of more so than anything. Like I know there's a massive, housing crisis out there, but for me it's a very much a kind of a love of vernacular architecture and a love of kind of how Ireland was back in the day that I kind of wanted to, I think, even just document. That was kind of all I wanted, was just to document it. And then I kind of ran out of houses as I was driving up and down. And I was like, well, I'm just doing this as a hobby. I can't really justify just driving other places to do this. So I thought maybe estate agents might have them, and maybe they might even have interior photos, because I'm such a goody two shoes. Like I wasn't climbing over walls and going in these derelict houses to take pictures that much. So I thought they might have photos, and the houses are actually for sale. So there might actually be a chance people could actually save them. And so that was what I did. It was like a rainy November, and I was on my computer when the dinner was cooking, and I went on to just a random website, and there was a house for about maybe 30,000, and I put it up, and all of my 1,000 followers, which wasn't a lot, were like, oh my God, that's actually for sale. Is it actually that cheap? I thought Ireland was one of the worst places to buy property. And it was from that point where people, I think, genuinely didn't realise there were cheap houses left. They just hadn't got a clue. And I'd bought one myself a couple of years beforehand, and anytime I mentioned to my cousins in Dublin or anything that I had bought it, they genuinely thought I had found this like white whale of a property, and there were no more of them out there. And I kept saying, and you'll know this yourself, you keep saying, They are out there. I promise.
Yeah.
I didn't just find the only one, but no one believed me. So
They're everywhere.
that
They're
was it, yeah.
everywhere you go.
They
Every
are.
road that you take, it doesn't even have to be necessarily rural. Like in suburban areas, there's a lot of rundown properties as well that need love and
course,
attention.
yeah.
And I love that. So before you did Cheap Irish Houses, then what's your background? How did you kind of come to it?
Well, I started out life after college as a website designer, and I worked at that for Jeannie about 10 years, and it was getting more tech heavy, and I realised that because I'm quite creative, like my other option after web design would have been to go to art college. That was kind of what I wanted. I wanted to maybe do art teaching or something like that. So it was getting very kind of tech heavy, and I just wasn't really that interested in learning coding and just spending my life at a computer. So I just kind of took the jump. I did my budget and I did my finances, and I saved up, and I said, look, I'm just leaving.
Wow.
I'm just going to leave. Can I survive for 3 or 4 months? Can I start working for myself? And I left, and literally a month later, the crash happened.
Oh.
It was a disaster. But look, I was poor, and I was making stuff with my hands, and I was sewing, and I learned dressmaking, and it was just literally the best time of my life. And during that time, like, I had been very smart that I got my mortgage before I left work.
Great.
So I got my mortgage when I was 23, and I left my job in IT when I was 27. So like, I had the house, and I had worked in IT down here remotely, even back then. But yeah, that was basically, I worked in tech and then went on to just kind of working with my hands. And like I said before, that the Cheap Irish Houses thing was just a hobby. That was all it was. And I still, to this day, work as an illustrator. Like, this isn't my full-time job.
Wow.
At all,
It's amazing. So it's like, I always feel as well, I love following people's natural career progressions and their life progressions. Like, all that web design and tech stuff really set you up to start Cheap Irish Houses. You know what I mean? And then it became such a success on top of that, because you obviously had all the, tech spec backgrounds that you could start putting this stuff online and start filming it, and then you have your graphics on top of that, because it looks like a lovely polished package that you always present, which I love. It's very appealing.
It does kind of come down to, you're totally right, having the background in web design, and then going from being my transition wasn't as clean. Like, it wasn't just like one day I decided I was going to, be someone who made dresses or something and then left. It wasn't like that. Like I said, I left at the beginning of the recession the last time. I had no work, no one was spending any money, and I struggled for a really long time, and actually ended up going back into doing graphic design, because I was like, look, I know how to do this. I know I can make money out of this.
Great.
It's still not coding.
Yeah.
So I this is a kind of a happy medium. And then I did that for a couple of months, and I was on great money. And I was like, I always say to people, I was like the dad out of the Beethoven movies when we were younger. I was like, head in a computer, going around, like, I was like, literally holidays, I was working anytime. Like, my brother lived with me, and he was like, I haven't seen your face in 3 days.
And it's awful, isn't it?
Yeah,
and then it's fine for a short period of time, but then you just have to walk away from it, I think. Yeah,
you do. And I kind of felt like I fell back into that, because it was kind of this safe place for me, because I knew I could make money. And then someone just randomly said to me, I mean, I was easily 30 by this stage, and someone happened to say to me, I'd like a graphic on a logo. I couldn't find one, and they said, would you consider trying to draw it? And I was like, sure, I'll give it a go. And that literally went from that graphic to me then stopping graphic design and doing illustration full time, because it kind of came on and on and on. It's mad. Like, so now you end up doing something that is very tactile and hands-on, but you still get the money you got from the tech side, which is, it's kind of a good balance. But it was a long
yeah, I get it. Lots of trial and error to really find that balance as well. I mean, that's kind of like, it's the same for me. Like, if I'm on set as an actor, like, a really heavy intensive hours, I've got small kids, young family, so it's really not conducive to family life. So I had to kind of like pull back, use all my skills, in front of camera and all these things. And then I was like, but I'm really interested in the podcast and talking to people, and their alternative lives and their journeys, and how we can all think outside the box a little bit and not be stuck in kind of the rat races, which is kind of what we're programmed to do a little bit, I always feel,
Yeah, I totally agree.
Coming back to Cheap Irish Houses, right? Like, where did the inspiration come from? I know you say you saw loads of houses, but was it primarily kind of, I suppose your own home as well, was that the starting point of kind of, I've done this, so everybody, other people can do it?
I mean, it definitely was the inspiration behind trying to find houses that were for sale. Because, like I said to you, people just genuinely didn't believe me that the houses were out there. They just didn't understand. And I think that was a really, really big thing, because I kind of felt like people thought that I was really lucky.
I totally get it.
I was like, this is literally, it was such a struggle. And I literally moved into a house with no front door and a generator in the back.
And you're like, that's not luck. That's hard
No,
work.
it's not. Yeah. And it's tough, and it's still tough.
Yeah.
Even to this day, it's still tough. And people honestly thought that I had just kind of hit the jackpot with it, and I was like, no, but I've made it into this now. It wasn't like this when I came here. And I think people needed to see that look, there are places out there, to be fair, that are even a lot better than mine. Like, I bought mine probably maybe 2004, 2004, yeah. So like, everything was on the rise, but like, the mortgages hadn't risen to the point that they were throwing money at me either. I got mortgage approval for 110,000, and I lived in Wexford, like half an hour outside Gorey is where I'm from. You couldn't buy a field for 110,000. You just couldn't, and I think people genuinely thought that I was really lucky and that I had found the one house in Ireland that you could possibly live in that was under 100,000. And it wasn't the case. And I kind of just wanted to show people, first of all, that they existed. And second of all, that you could come into one and not massacre it and spend up to 300,000 doing it up. And like, you honestly might as well build a house at that stage.
Yeah.
If you're doing that and you're taking every bit of character and every bit of history and tradition out of the house, that, like, I literally cry when I see that. I can't. It's a terrible, terrible thing. It's like sacrilege.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I agree, because like, I mean, I've been in a similar position to you. I had to buy really, really cheap at the start. Now, we bought in 2013. So it was like after the crash. And it was kind of, it was a bit of an upswing, but like, always old houses as well, rescues that, like, some of them didn't have back doors like yours, didn't have front doors, partial roof, hole in the wall, all that kind of stuff. And I think people are really off put by that, because they say, first off, I can't afford to do it. Second off, I don't have the know-how to do it. But really, there's Pinterest and YouTube is where you get the know-how. That's how I like ripped out our first house with my bare hands. I knocked walls, I took plaster off the walls, I took up the floorboards, and the stuff you find is unbelievable as well. Like, I found in the first house we bought, I found newspapers from 1916.
Wow.
And I still have them. They're 1916, and it was an old army barricade or army barracks house. So there would have been cadets living in the house. So the history in those houses are, I think, so special as well. So when you talk about going in and not obliterating the history, I agree. I think there's so much to be had with restoring an old house. But then there's the fine balance of restoring the old house, but also making it conducive to modern living.
Yeah.
And there is a balance to be had in that, I think, because it's all well and good having like an amazing old house with old fireplaces, but then like there's a draft coming in and there's a wind, it's like, what would be your thing about finding the balance between the two that kind of marries together the old and the new, so that you can live comfortably but within an old structure?
I think, what I notice with people is, it's so funny, having less money almost makes you restore a house more sympathetically. Absolutely. Because you can't just come in and do absolutely everything that your architect advises you to do. To be honest, you mightn't even have an architect. So you're coming in and you're living in it yourself and you're doing the stuff. I honestly think that, like, for me, I hate seeing hearths pulled out of these houses. I hate seeing the chimney knocked down. Now, I understand that there are some houses that are very, very small. And I understand, open fires aren't the big thing that they were years ago. Most people don't even use them anymore, which is totally fine. And I get the need for sustainability and just, not this dependence on fossil fuels. I totally understand that. But even just as a cosmetic thing, just even sealing up the top of the hearth so that it's like not even open to the elements, but you just keep it intact. And you even just put a couch into it or something like that. Especially if it's a really big one like I have here. I mean, my house is probably 20 foot deep, and the hearth goes from one wall to the other. It's this massive stone arch, and it was in behind a wall when I came here, and only my dad had seen this little arch on the plaster, and he said, I bet you there's a hearth in behind that still. And we literally, like you, bare hands pulled it out.
I love that. It's like it's like following a little golden thread in an old house, isn't it? And you're like, now the only downside is when you start unraveling an old house, like the whole thing will just go. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, there's a hole there I didn't know was. Okay.
Yeah.
But like you said, with hearths as well, you know, it gives actually hearths, rather than blanking them, it gives you extra space. You can either put, like, you know, I know, like you said, sustainability, but you can put the wood burning stove in there for effect. You can stick a couch in there. You can put a little seated area. There's so much to be had with the old features. You know, it could be your little mini office. There's loads.
I mean,
of
I had mine when I came here first, because obviously there was nothing in it. And I started out the first, I'd say 10 years I was here, I had a Rayburn in it because that was the dream.
Yeah.
And I had this big plan of, like, you know, a Rayburn sitting in it, and then like I'd do presses either side. But it turned out that the room had the stairs and all in it, and there just wasn't enough wall space to fit a functioning kitchen in it. So we ended up moving it to kind of the good room, because the good room had good decent walls on it. And now we've a wood burning stove in it, and it's perfect.
Gorgeous.
You know, and it heats the whole house. And it's just, I think some people will come in and they'll get houses like this, and they will have lots of money, and they will have lots of advice, professional advice that is kind of not necessarily the most educated when it comes to vernacular building. So like, I understand that like engineers, surveyors, architects are all fantastically qualified at what they do, but a lot of the time they're trained with newer building techniques, and you end up getting ill-advised almost by accident, and there's no badness in it. It just happens. And you get a lot of this, oh, it'd be cheaper to knock that down than to keep it. You get that a lot.
I've had that in so many houses. You should just knock that wall, it's cheaper. You're like, my God, no, I can't. Like, I just
there's
can't.
nothing that can't be saved. Or you know, how could a girl like you move into somewhere like this? I've heard it all. It's like the quilcha forestry, that'll kill you. The knotweed, that'll kill you.
Oh, knotweed.
Everything is like, Let alone a woman living in rural Ireland on her own. Heaven forbid you're just going to get murdered. It's like, you'd get a good podcast out of it, but
Oh my God. Yeah, it's so true. There's so much, like, it's like, and that's interesting about even rural living as well. Have you come across, I suppose, on your travels during Cheap Irish Houses and different people that you've met, people who maybe have relocated out of the cities and out of the urban areas looking for a bit more space, but were really reluctant to move into rural areas, and subsequently have found themselves absolutely loving it and really settling into a community that they didn't feel they'd settle into. Have you come across that much?
Yeah, I found that, right. So people, I think, as soon as they think you're outside of a speed limit, they think that they are completely isolated. And I think it's only when you bring people to look at houses and you go, right, look, you cannot physically see your neighbour's house, but your neighbour is a couple of 100 metres down the road around the bend. Your shop and your church and your community centre and your sports field and all are just across the way. And there's actually, I feel like in rural places, there's more of an effort to kind of bring community in. I feel like, I mean, the people who live on my road, it's so funny. I've been asked so many times as well about meeting people my own age and all down here. And the thing about it is, like, there are very few people in my local area that are my age, but yet the group of friends that we have they range from 90 to maybe their 50s, and then obviously people younger than us that are only just moving in. And it's more of a broader range of ages, but everyone understands that everybody's quite vulnerable. And you know that, especially when there's someone on their own, you know the person is on their own, and you check on them, and you make sure, like, if it snows or something, that there's always somebody around to make sure everybody's okay.
That's gorgeous.
You know, so I think it's a different type of community. Like, I would feel a lot more alone sometimes in Dublin, when I go
Oh,
up,
yeah.
because I feel like you could literally, something could happen to you and people will walk past. Whereas here,
Oh, they'd step over you on the street.
would.
If you fell on
They
the
would.
street in Dublin, you'd be like, oh, well, she's obviously langers. So, like, we'll just step over her. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
No, I agree.
But I mean, and you know, I've had great people help me in Dublin over the years,
course.
but on the majority there, people tend to kind of just look at their shoes when they're going places. They keep to themselves a lot more. And I feel like, I think people then can move out somewhere like Dublin and genuinely think that they're going to move into an isolated area where they're going to have no support. And it's the complete opposite, to be
Oh, it's
fair.
brilliant. And I think as well, when you talk about the age range of people that are within your own community, it's so much more interesting. That's what I find. I live in a community. I mean, it's quite a mixed community of young and old. I find myself hanging out with the older generation a lot more. I don't want to be disrespectful to my neighbours my age, but I find the older generation really, really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, they've been there and they've done that. So why would we not listen to them, you know?
Yeah.
So I think like turnkey homes are obviously amazing. There's a lot to be said for them, where you literally get your piece of paper, get your keys, walk in the door, drop your bags, and you're home. You're living there, rather than having to do this big physical renovation or have to think like, how am I going to do this? And it's going to take 5 years to do this, or you mightn't have the physical capacity to rip stuff out like you and I were able to do, or you've got small kids or whatever it might be. What's the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome in your own like home transformation, and have you witnessed other people's challenges along the way in the show where they've had to walk in and go, how am I going to do this? You know, like, are there any major challenges that come to mind when you think of transforming your own home?
I think the biggest thing we've had trouble with in the house has been honestly the stuff that we couldn't do ourselves, because like we can do a lot ourselves, and like there's things where we wouldn't be brilliant at it, but I'm okay with a lesser finish on stuff. So like I get that like my walls are wonky, and if we need to do something like patch up a wall, I would much rather we did it and it looked and we kind of just flattened it out as best we could, or we brushed it so it had a lovely kind of a worn kind of a feel to it. I like that kind of stuff, and I think it fits in better in our house. What I struggle with is when there's stuff that you can't do yourself. So when you need wiring.
Oh,
you need,
I was going to say
like
electrics
now,
are the big one.
My husband's a plumber. He was a plumber before like the crash, and so he has like a vast knowledge of that, and would have worked for a company where it was a building company where, you know, everyone kind of had to muck in and do everything. So
Great.
he's quite handy, which is great. But like wiring is one we don't go near, and like even things like stuff to do with your septic and stuff like that. You know, I find that in rural areas it can be quite difficult to get people out to do the work. So like I got, I think maybe 3 years ago, I got my fitted kitchen. I was in the house about 15 years.
Wow.
And I didn't have a fitted kitchen. Now I had a kitchen and it was lovely. And it was like my dresser and my table, and I had the Rayburn, which I was cooked everything on. I was just in heaven. But we ended up getting a fitted kitchen, and I had a hob, and really the hob was the only thing that we kind of struggled with. And I could not get an electrician out to wire our hob because it wasn't a full rewire of the house, and they had no interest whatsoever in coming out.
No way.
So like to this day, I know when we designed the kitchen, we had a little touring gas hob that we had for when it snowed, because we lose electricity quite a lot here in the winter because we get snowed in. So we had the little touring gas hob, and then a nice big brand new shiny glass hob that still does not work, and it's sitting in the worktop. Now that's something I think tradespeople not coming out because the things you want to do either don't make them enough profit, or they kind of see it as just being kind of a bit of a nixer as opposed to, you know, just being a proper job. Yeah, and I find that like when you're DIYing, I feel like that's quite difficult because there is a huge amount of stuff you can handle yourself, and the little bits that are left over are almost not worth somebody's while coming out to do.
Yeah.
Whereas if you had a construction company coming in and you're gutting the whole place, you've got the electrician comes in and the plumber comes in and
yeah, and they'll rack that up on the bill as well, which is what's attractive to them. Like you said, it's the small jobs they've no interest in. It's too much manpower. Yeah.
And I think that's it. It's almost like when you're too functional. And then there's just maybe one or two jobs you can't do, and it's just really hard to get people in to do work on a house when they're not doing the whole house.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Which is a pity.
I agree with you. And for any of the listeners out there, I've done a couple of houses. Maggie's obviously like prolific when it comes to houses and the know-how of it. don't ever touch the electrics yourself.
No, no.
It's the
never,
one thing it's terrifying, particularly in old houses. Whew, the electrics. I only ripped out a pantry only recently, and I was really lucky. Had a great builder, and he pulled through a wire, and he was like, he got an electric shock off it. I went, oh my God, are you okay? And he was like, yeah, but he held it up to me. Mice had eaten it. So like if he hadn't pulled it through and found it, that's a fire waiting to happen, you know. So I was like, thank God that he did that, you know. I'm not happy he got electric shock off it, but it did save a house fire. What is your top tip for people who are willing to make a go of cheap Irish houses? And what is the stuff you kind of see on cycle? What's your top tip? But also, what are the pitfalls that you see people kind of doing repeatedly?
I mean, my top tip, and it's to get them, it's like so many fold, because it keeps your mortgage lower. It just makes your house price lower because of the house.
That's the social media snippet right there. I can never wear earbuds.
I can't either. They fall out.
They don't fit in my ears. That's why I've got
very
these
strangely shaped ear.
I'm the same. That's why I've got these big clunky things on. They never fit in my ears.
That's too funny. I have to make sure. Okay, that was hilarious. Okay, so I'll start that again. Maybe. Okay.
What was the question I asked you? Oh, the
it
top
was
tips
about
and
what
pitfalls.
the top tip. Yeah. So like, my top tip is, if you can kind of condition yourself when you're buying a house, when you're browsing houses, you're getting your mortgage and all done, you could have maybe a year or two, maybe more, when you're saving for your deposit. You have a big massive chunk of time there, right? You have to get your head around the idea of living in a house like this without fully doing it up on day one. I feel like this is the biggest tip I can give anybody. If you can, even like you were saying before about Pinterest, if you can go on Pinterest and instead of looking up, you know, show homes in California or like selling sunset stuff, right? What you need to do is you need to go on Pinterest and look up like rustic villas in maybe Italy or France, and places where things like stone floors are embraced, kind of whitewashed walls are embraced. It's like, if you can get your head around looking at this stuff as being beautiful and being stylish, because it can be quite stylish. Some of the most amazing houses I've ever seen in interiors magazines have been old houses that people left the character in. Yeah. And I think if you can get your head around that and you can train yourself to see these houses as beautiful as they are, when you come into it, instead of you spending maybe 50 to 100,000 doing it up, you could spend 5,000. And I mean, I have real life experience of this. Yeah. I didn't spend a lot on my place. Now I know my place isn't finished, but I film renovations for the show. And I went into a house a couple of weeks ago, which is going to be on season 3. And the girl had bought the house. Now, granted, the house was up in it was in like the commuter belt of Dublin. So the house itself was expensive. But we're not even going to think about that, because houses are the same everywhere, right? So this was a little semi-detached cottage, and it was kind of in a little kind of a speed limit of a town. So you'd see kind of 2 little bungalows stuck together, and then there's driveways, and then another 2 bungalows. And it had been owned by this little old lady. And the girl had bought the house, and when she moved into it, she said it was kind of just, you know, granny carpets and brown built-ins, and it was a bit tacky and a bit retro, but not in a good way.
Okay, yeah.
She came into it, and I swear when we walked into this house, it was like something out of an interiors magazine. It was the most amazing house I'd ever seen. And I asked her how much she spent on it, and she said, I think maybe 5,000 euro. It's like,
wow.
What? And I'm there with the guys on the crew going, I told you this could be done. And they don't believe me.
What kind of stuff was she using? Was it salvaged furniture?
No,
like
literally
stripping
all
back?
she did, right? So the majority of what she did in the house was she emptied it of everything like kind of the ticky-tacky stuff.
Yeah.
Left
the old
fireplaces
stuff. Like,
yeah. So she left like there was a cast iron fireplace in it. She left it in it. She pulled up carpets and stuff like that. But she literally painted the place. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
The kitchen was white. She painted the sitting room like a navy, and she had like gold, real opulent gold fittings. I'll tell you what she bought. She bought like 4 units of a fitted kitchen and a worktop. So she had this little mini kitchen in the back kitchen, which was amazing. It was white, it was polished. She had a lovely marble counter. She had this tiny little kitchen that was her dream. but the whole rest of the kitchen was just painted white.
Wow.
She bought her couch for her sitting room, a velvet couch for her sitting room. And other than that, it was paint and stuff she had gathered up over the years. Like, so she had like this mirror was my granny's, and this kitchen table was my granny's or my mammy's. And it was just like the stuff she had in it was kind of very vintage, but it was Irish vintage. Like, it wasn't like she was there kind of buying antiques off of the continent or anything and bringing them back. It was just real humble Irish stuff that you see in every single house like this. And she had done the whole thing. Like, she had a quite unfortunate looking wet room in the back. You know, when a house has been lived in by someone old and they've all the handles and you know, like that, and it was kind of a fairly unfortunate looking tile colour. And we went into it and I was like, what did you do with the bathroom? And she goes, oh, I just dressed it differently. And you could see it was like kind of plants and gold stuff and it was amazing. It was the most amazing house. And she spent nothing on it. And I was so proud of her because I was like, this is what people need to do. If people could see what she did, that's what you kind of need in a magazine. You need someone seeing that, and that's like $5,000. She spent maybe $6,000 altogether. She spent or something. That's incredible. And I was just like, this is what I'm saying to people. And it's very hard for me because my house was fully derelict. Wow. And it kind of even now wouldn't be kind of interiors magazine quality. I wouldn't even dream of putting it on anything like that. But hers was. Like, hers, she came into it. It was perfectly habitable. She had good wiring. She had good plumbing. She had main services. She had an acre of land out the back. She had loads of outbuildings. And all she did was redecorate the house. And anyone else would have come in and just gutted that place. And I said to her, so like, obviously when it comes to the money you're spending on it, you obviously haven't insulated the place, because insulation's quite expensive, and just kind of upgrading it like that. And she said, do you know what? I'm doing that next year. It's fine. And that was it. Whereas the engineer on the show was very like, well, you should have insulation and you should have this. And she was like, I'm fine for a year. I need to see how warm this house is. Yeah. And how much it costs me. Yeah. And then I'll go from there. Yeah. And I was just like, this girl. It was just like, that's what I would recommend. Yeah. Try and make yourself see some sort of, like, gain some sort of appreciation of these houses as they are, and kind of look at makeovers. Go on Pinterest, look at makeovers of these places and see cheap makeovers where really all they're doing is putting kind of a new paint colour, or they're dressing it really well. Because Pinterest is great like that. Pinterest will call something a makeover, and it will literally be, they spent €2,000 or €3,000 buying interior products from a home store,
and you take them out and the room is the exact same.
Very same. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I would say would be just try and get an appreciation for the houses and try to not do too much. Just, you don't need, and that's not even about saving character. It's even in a little kind of ticky-tacky bungalow that doesn't have character anyway, but just, I had girls on the show in the first season, and they came out of a house that was perfectly habitable. It had single glazed wooden windows, and they came out to Kieran and they said, right, love the house. So how much is it to get this house up to spec? And Kieran was like, well, what do you mean by up to spec? Like, what do you think that means? And I hear that a lot. And you realise that people think that the houses are not habitable. They think there's something wrong with them and they need to spend a lot of money to get them up to spec. And really, it's so relative to what you want to live in, what you're used to living in. You know?
Yeah, I mean, up to spec for me means the roof is on, it's not leaking, the electrics are done, there's a key in the front door that's working, and the water is switched on. That's up to spec for me, because like you said, everything else can be dressed in due course.
Absolutely, yeah. Getting heat, anything, just keeping yourself warm.
Exactly.
Keeping your family safe, keeping your family warm. That's like fed, watered. That's literally
it.
Like,
that's it.
Everything else is a bonus. And I think even people, like I even say to young people, if the place you are looking at is an improvement on the place you're renting at the moment, you need to not write it off your list. Because people come from really bad rentals where they don't even have heating, they don't have insulation, they might be sharing a bedroom. But then they come to buy a house and they're like, well, I want this and I want this and I want this and I want this. And I want it all within 1.5 miles of my parents' house. And you're like, there are not enough. So you have to kind of be realistic, I think, a little bit as well, and go, look, if I've managed living in this rental for the last 10 years and it's been a bit crap, but I've done it. if I could just improve my quality of life, and I'm on the property ladder, and this house will be worth money,
and it's
moving
yours.
forward.
More importantly, the house is theirs. You know, it's like I think that's the most tangible thing that you can have, is that like you don't have this constant threat of like, oh, will the rent go up, or, you know, am I going to be booted out at the end of the year, or whatever it is. And like you say, like, you know, all the work can be done incrementally. Like the work that we've done in different houses, we've done it over a period of 4 or 5 years. The current house I'm in, like I'm in it 4 years, but like this is going to be a lifetime's work for this house, you know. And we could have come in and went, oh, let's blitz it and tear everything out and start fresh. But it's like, no, you have, I feel like for me, I have to live in it, definitely. See how it works, see what rooms function well. And as your family grow, if you do have a family or whatever your situation is, situations change, rooms change for different things. Like everybody went to work from home. Well, most people went to work from home in the last couple of years, which really snookered anyone who had made open plan houses, you know, because they were like, oh God, let's get a builder in and get a wall up because I need an office now, you know.
Exactly.
So it's interesting that it will, like, the house will change shape as your life changes shape as well, I think.
And I think that's another thing, that open plan thing that you mentioned. I think people as well assume in this like up to spec mentality, they assume that everybody wants open plan, you know, that everyone wants that. And I had a house hunter looking at a house last week, and the engineer, the instinct was, look, we need to knock a wall down. We need to get these 2 rooms linked in together. And the girl was like, no, I'm buying an old farmhouse because I want traditional rooms. I want a sitting room, and I want a kitchen and maybe a playroom for the kids. But I want, like, if I'm connecting anything to the kitchen, it's going to be a playroom so I can keep an eye on the kids, you know. It's not. And I think people very much think that I suppose it's not okay to like these houses, and it's not okay to like the way these houses are laid out, because they're just conditioned to think that that's the case. I think young people almost need to be given permission to go publicly, I like a house like this. And I think that's something I've done with people, where people go, oh, I kind of agree with her, I kind of like these old houses. And it's almost people who would have never said it out loud. Now. You know, it's like, I like my granny's house. I'd love to live in a house like my granny's house. I see young people say that a lot. This reminds me of granny's house, and I love granny's house. I'd love to live there. And I think it just gives them a permission to be okay with living in a house like this. Whereas up until now, it was just like myself and you were like kind of, oh, we got a house like this, but we're not talking to anyone. The shame on the family.
I know, yeah. Or even, excuse me, when you go to talk about open plan, like the first house that we got, tiny little 2 up, 2 down, terraced house, and we were like, oh, we're open plan the whole thing. It was the biggest waste. Really? Open planning that house was a waste, because all of a sudden I just felt like there was, instead of having 2 rooms, which would have been a sitting room and another study room or dining room or whatever it was, we did put a little kitchen extension out the back. All of a sudden there was this one big walkway, and everything just got dumped in this room. Because there was nowhere to put stuff, because we were minus 2 walls now. And when you minus these 2 walls, you're minusing the furniture that goes against these walls, which gives you the storage. I was like, I would never do open plan again. I really wouldn't. Not in that sense.
It's funny. I think everyone just assumes everyone loves it. And I think that's a kind of maybe an architect thing, and like a builders, like modern builders, where I think they have their ways that they've been trained to do stuff, and they're not. I almost wish more creative people went into architecture. Yeah, I agree. I would love that, because I think I saw a show one time years ago, I think it would have been Grand Designs or something, and Kevin MacLeod was saying, they were talking about architects, and they were like, oh, the architect told me I need to get rid of this feature because it just doesn't suit the plan he's had. And Kevin MacLeod, I think it was, said, look, a good architect will find a solution to the problem you have. You know, it's not like you don't just go rip it out. Like, I just wish that like it was just more creative than stick a glass box on it, or maybe let's make a difference between the old and the new. So we have the old building, and then we have this hideous modern thing stuck onto it, and you're like, I like vernacular stuff, but I would like my extension maybe to have a corrugated iron roof. I would
love
like it.
That.
I think, why can't they just make a little bit of a nod to the vernacular? Like, let's not just make it look like, well, this is an old bit, and this 2-story tower thing
Yeah.
I just think that's so unfortunate.
And also, when you're renovating, you're talking about using these old tin roofs and stuff. There's a lot of reclamation that can happen, which is a way cheaper. Like, I mean, obviously, it's better for the environment because it's sustainability, reusing old materials, but it's way cheaper, and I think looks way cooler as well.
Yeah, totally.
We did a renovation recently. It was an office, and the old roof of it was one of those tin roofs. So we saved all the galvanized roofing off it and then faced the whole building with it. So it just looks really, really cool.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was deadly.
Yeah.
That was my husband's idea, I think, or was it his friend's idea? Anyway, it's one of them. But it was
I
cool.
almost find like that type of reclamation still isn't trendy enough. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like they want you to go into salvage yards and buying granite and buying flagstones and buying old iron gates, but like the type of reclamation our generation does hasn't become trendy enough yet. Like, and I just feel like it's because of that a lot of this stuff is getting wasted. Like, it's really, really getting wasted.
Yeah.
Because there's not like that older generation where it was actually a sign of affluence to have granite, reclaimed granite and stuff like that in your house. With us, it's like, I think that's stuff that I like, which is like the corrugated iron and stuff like that. And even like sash windows, like I've had people doing up houses where I'll be called in to get stuff out of it before they gut the place. And no matter how much I disagree with what they're doing, I also don't want the stuff going to landfill. I'm very passionate about that. I'm like, someone will use this.
Yes.
Someone will use this somewhere. And my husband is like, will you stop?
Yeah, because it's going to be a yard full of stuff before you're done. But I agree. Like,
I just can't leave it. I just can't, you know?
Yeah, I'm the same. I have stuff. I have furniture from my parents. We can't see it, but there's a lamp next to me. My parents wanted rid of it. None of my siblings wanted it. I've had it for years. It's a beautiful hand-carved wooden lamp that was a wedding gift to my parents. And I was like, you can't part with that. You couldn't. So my house is full of cobbled together bits, but I furnish my house that way. And I furnished it through charity stores as well. Like a chest of drawers. You'd be hard pushed to find a chest of drawers anywhere, but I have 3 chests of drawers that I'd say I spent probably 30 quid each on them. You know, so there, like you said, like that girl who dressed her house for whatever 5 or 6 grand. There are ways of doing it. You don't have to get brand new stuff, you know.
Yeah, I think you almost need, I think people just need to see examples. It's like before my Instagram feed, I think people just were like, they didn't know and they didn't talk about it publicly that people could actually do this with these houses. And I think it's just, we're just trying to get it into kind of regular conversation and kind of into just, it's like the normal narrative in Ireland that these houses are saved and that they're, look, honestly, I would rather see them being lived in and not necessarily renovated sympathetically than falling to the ground and going back to the grass, because that's all was happening to them before that, you know. It's like baby steps, you know.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something earlier which is really important, and I wonder, is this the psychology behind it? Is it to do with perceived affluence as opposed to perceived poverty? You know what I mean? So like, does it I'm thinking on the fly here, but like, is it more to have a new build or a brand new house with a brand new kitchen and brand new everything? That's going to cost a lot of money. People are going to know that. So there's a perceived affluence there, even though they might be massively in debt by the end of it. As opposed to like, you know, there's a difference between wanting to salvage something because you think it looks beautiful, or like needing to salvage it because it's not quite in your budget, you know, and either way works. Either way is, you know, I think is the way forward anyway, certainly.
No, I totally agree. And some people that do it well, even if they do it from a place of, I suppose, poverty, you like, which is what I would have done originally. To be fair, I really love it as well, though. I really love it. So I can't say that I'm like, oh, I just made myself buy secondhand. I'm just the way I was brought up. I love it. My mother just despairs with me, but I love it. I think, but do you know what's going to happen? Right, here's what's going to happen. Having a house at all is going to be a sign of influence in a while, and I think that people are going to have these smaller houses and these like houses they've had to renovate, and that in itself is going to make you look like you have money, because there's going to be so many people that don't have houses at all and are renting their whole lives. And I think people are realizing that like, whereas before, like you said, the new builds where, oh, look, that person has money and they're driving around in their 2022 Jeep and all this, and the wife has one and the husband has one and all the kids have them. Fantastic.
Yeah.
But then you get to a stage where it's having a house at all makes you look like you're well off.
Wow.
Because like so many people say it to me and they're like, oh, you bought that when you were 23. You must have had a great job. You must have had this. You must have had that. And to be honest, I just literally bought the first house that they accepted an offer on. And I had a very small budget. And I roughed it. But now people look at me and think, God, that's a fantastic house you have.
Yeah.
You know, you must be so wealthy and you must have done a great job. And it's totally not that. But it's getting to that stage where people just see you owning a house, or heaven forbid, like you, where you've had houses and renovated them and passed, you know, kind of sold them and went on to new houses. They look at that as a sign of affluence. And
Crazy, isn't it?
It's madness.
And that's an interesting point, actually, because I think when people, like, again, the mindset is when you're starting out and you're young, or not necessarily young, but going for your first house, that you must get a mortgage, okay? And that is probably 70% of the time true. But like when we started out, there was no way in hell that we would have gotten a mortgage, like no way. But we cobbled together some savings. I was lucky, got a loan like a small loan from my parents, which we repaid to them as a mortgage, actually. And we got a credit union loan, and we cobbled that all together. And so we had no mortgage on our first house, and that was the only way that we were able to purchase. Like, are there other ways that you can think of that don't necessarily mean people have to go for mortgages? Or does that mean as well, like thinking outside of bricks and mortar, are there other types of homes that people can start on and start looking towards?
It's a good question. I think one of the things I want people to open up their minds to is, look, if you have a massive deposit, and at the moment deposits are huge. Yeah. If you have a massive deposit, like my deposit was 10,000, and like that to me was the most amazingly large amount of money I've had any. And to be fair, even when I got mine, like I was like you, I was cobbled together. I think back then they didn't check credit unions, you know? So like I had my credit union loan. Like my parents couldn't afford to give me money, but my parents borrowed and I paid them back. Like it was still the combination of my mortgage, my payment to the credit union, and the payment on my parents' one to get that 10 grand together was still less than my rent. So I was like, and also I'm so sensible that they knew 100% that I would pay it back to them.
Absolutely.
But like we were just like, our family are very like that. We're like, right, how can we do this? There has to be a way to do this. And we figured it out. And like, it was done and it was fine. But I would have, like, if I had to save that up over years, like I never had that amount of spare money. There's no way I'd still be bloody saving for my deposit at that rate. But then also I didn't get it as a gift either. It was just like me risking, my parents risking, and everyone just kind of going, look, we all trust each other. We all know that she's going to pay this back, whatever happens. And like, that's what we did. But like, I see people nowadays and they 40 and 50,000 in deposits. And I'm like, would you not sit down and think about maybe whether you could move to another county where a house is that price? And like, yes, okay, you have to figure out whether you can do that, and it doesn't suit everybody. But the thing people forget is that the day you buy your house or the day you get your mortgage or whatever, you don't stop earning money. So all of that money that you've been saving for the last 5 years, you still have that coming in, because they go, well, look, I could buy that house for 40,000, but how am I going to do it up? How am I going to have any money? Because the bank won't give me any money. But the thing is, like, you're maybe saving £1,000 a month for the last 5 years. And I can guarantee you €1,000 a month going into any house makes a massive difference.
It's huge. And also, if it's really basically habitable, you get the mortgage, you get into the house, you're saving £1,000 a month. You're probably going to save another £1,000 a month by letting go of a rental that you were on.
Of course,
you know. So it's like, excuse me.
It's massive, because if you buy it for cash, if you buy it for 40,000 cash, you've zero payment, no payment to anybody. You still have your 1,000 that you were saving, or whatever amount of money you were saving. And like, to me, €1,000 a month left over to put into a house is getting someone in to do work. How would you spend €1,000 on materials and also work a job and have the time to do the work that, like, I know nowadays you could, because materials have gone up, but like, honestly, if you were putting away €1,000 a month and that's just you, and then you have your partner if you're with someone else, and you're working and you're still earning, and there's still bonuses, and you still have different kind of things in your life that come and go, and you can sell stuff, and you
Yeah.
don't need all the trophies. You definitely don't when you move into a new house.
no.
You can kind of get rid of a lot of the stuff that was keeping you occupied because you were maybe in an apartment or something, and because when you're out in the countryside as well and you've space, it's cheaper to entertain yourself.
Yeah, it is.
You can I'll go out in the garden.
Yeah, it is.
I'll go to the shed and I'll build something, or I'll DIY or something. It's a lot cheaper.
It is, because if you're in an apartment, you're kind of like, well, I got to get out of here, so I got to have a meal or the cinema or whatever it might be, or I might go visit somebody. So I actually agree. I'm happy. I'm on a little patch of land being crazy on my own. I'm very happy doing that.
I think a lot of people are, though. A lot of people genuinely are happy with that. And I think some people don't really realise it until they get out and they realise, well, look, I don't need to drive for a half an hour to go for a hike. I can just go for a walk near my house because I actually live in a really beautiful area now.
Yeah.
I think, and like that, meals and stuff like that, you tend to then, when you live away, that your free time is spent with catching up with your family and visiting people at home and things like
lovely.
that. And it's free.
Yeah. Yeah. And as well, I think obviously there's, people are more conscious that they can work from home, work remotely these days as well. So it frees people up in a sense. Have you looked into outside of bricks and mortar, not the usual traditional renovation, but I suppose a friend of mine lives in a yurt on land, which I think is absolutely incredible, and they raise their young family on that. Is that something that you've looked into as well? Alternative modes of living that way?
I've looked into it in the way that it gets shot down constantly by planners, and that is something that it just irks me. Do you know? I've had so many people over the years that I've known that have passed in and out of my life that have either rented cabins, even lived in those little cabins that people all have in their gardens and kind of no one really talks about, but they're all there. And I just feel like things like that would just make such a massive difference if young people could get planning for them.
Yeah.
And so many people just haven't a clue what the planning laws are. So many people, we do a feed, and we only do it kind of from time to time when we have a bit of spare time on our hands, and it's cheap Irish land. And the idea of it is that we're just looking at very, very cheap plots of land. And every single time I put up a post, people will go, oh, sure, I'll buy that and I'll just put a cabin on it, or I'll pull a mobile home in. And to be fair, a mobile home has wheels and it can be moved. So that's one thing. But they don't understand that you actually aren't allowed to just pull a cabin in or just build a cabin on a piece of green land without getting planning permission. And planners in Ireland don't look favourably on those little cabins, but yet they're an affordable way of getting a house. If it's 200,000 minimum to put a house on a plot of land, right? So that's a block built house, and it's maybe 25,000, 30,000 for someone to come in and put a cabin on it in 3 days. And all you have to do is have your foundations put on. Are you telling me that would not solve something, And we have all these arguments about how, they don't suit the vernacular and they're not an indigenous building type in Ireland. And you're letting all the vernacular buildings go. You're not even trying to save them. So I would rather see cabins, honestly, that young people could afford than monstrosities of mock Georgian 6-bedroom houses that don't really actually honour our legacy as Irish people. They're just kind of very colonial kind of buildings, and it would be lovely to just see young people, get into houses. I'm at a stage now where I'm like, do we start trailer parks? Is that what we're doing next? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah. This was exactly what I was thinking. Do people come together as a community and get some land and then live? I don't want to say trailer park, because trailer park has connotations to it, but in the same breath though, is that what we're coming to, in the sense
but you wouldn't get planning for it. This is the thing, you wouldn't get planning. So it's the people, the suits who are making these decisions, again, aren't creative enough. They're not necessarily forward thinking enough. They're the same people that were making the decisions in the 90s, in the late 80s. This is a very kind of an old boys club, for want of a better word. And it's, I don't like being very outspoken about stuff, because I feel like I need to be positive about stuff, and it is very much the positivity that gets people encouraged about it and gets people enthusiastic. But at the same time, Seriously.
There has to be, I think, I know, I agree with you, but there has to be some kind of leniency or revisiting of these planning laws just to see. There has to be alternatives. Surely there has to be alternatives within the community, you know?
I mean, like, there's a very big kind of a movement to protect Ireland's countryside and to make sure that we have like our greenfield areas are kept nice and we don't build these like unconnected separate houses in rural Ireland, and everyone needs to be ushered into villages and towns because that's the only place you can have a normal quality of life. And they're really missing out on the fact that like thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people live in rural Ireland, in proper rural Ireland, where you can't see your neighbour and you're like half an hour from the local Tesco, and it's totally okay. And like, we're not nuts to want to live out here, but also no, but like I grew up like that. I grew up like that. Like and even in Wexford, like Wexford when I grew up, I was born in 81, so I was quite young in the 80s, and I just remember it being very quiet and peaceful. And we walked 3 miles to the shop. If you needed anything between shopping day and the next shopping day, you walked to the local shop. And then Mammy drove and got shopping once a week in Gorey, which was half an hour away. And that was literally your life. And it wasn't I think probably the GAA club was 3 miles away. So you had to drive to that to go to training, to hurling or whatever. And it's totally normal. And moving all of us into a village or a town is not the solution. Like, they're going to have these beautiful farmland everywhere and everyone's going to be homeless.
Yeah.
You know, it's not ideal to just move people into blocks of houses and towns either.
Yeah.
That's kind of been done before too, and it didn't really work that well, you know.
I think they're called tenements. Yeah, I agree. I think there needs to be a decentralization of a lot. Particularly our housing structures and how we decide to live going forward, you know, rather than being kind of, like you said, lumped into big solid urban areas or cities. I feel like you get to see these lovely snapshots of old Ireland when you walk into properties and you see, it's just how you see how people lived, because their possessions are still there. And I've been in plenty of those houses as well. I find it absolutely fascinating. I think it's really beautiful, but it kind of makes me a little bit sad as well that, you know, it's a part of Ireland that's, I don't want to say lost, because I think people like you, and there's many more people out there who are really interested in it and interested in restoring and saving these things. Was there any house that you walked into that made you really sad by what you saw?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because there's so many.
Not to bring it down or anything, but
no,
you know.
It's not. But it's right. It's heartbreaking seeing the houses. I think because I know, and I suppose to a certain degree, I'm kind of responsible for people coming in, and then I mean I know the houses are already for sale, so that's not me. Like I get that, but like when I bring people into a house that has the little JFK picture still on the wall, and it has like a little outshot bed, and it has like a pillow and stuff still on it, and the little curtain, and the like the hearth, and it has the crane, and I am literally there going, this is all going to be pulled out. Every bit, this is going to be pulled out. And I know like there's every chance a lot of the houses I go into that I could be the last person that sees it like that.
Wow.
And that is, and I have gone to houses, and like we would do house tours for YouTube. And I would go to houses myself that if I saw one and I just really loved it, I'd be like, I need to see this house in person. And I would just do a little house tour for everyone because I know they love them. And I would be in those houses with my husband and go, I can't leave. How many hours have we got left? I just can't leave, because I would with tears in my eyes even now thinking about it. Now when I'm in work and I'm filming, I'm very, very professional, and I'm like, yes, we have to go. And then you're outside going, oh. The amount of times I've wanted to save stuff out of them, but I know that the best case scenario is that the stuff stays, and that the person that buys the house has the stuff that the people who lived before built with their own hands, and like the vernacular furniture and stuff. It's built for the house. It should stay with it. It doesn't. It never bloody does. And this is what I get really kind of torn about, because I will say to people, look, if someone comes in here and they buy this and they are even whispering about gutting the place, this is my number.
Call
you
me.
have to ring me.
Yeah.
I don't care what time of the night it is. I will get into my Jeep and I will come. And I think people just think I'm cracked. They think I'm cracked. But at the same time, like, I just know so many of the houses are, oh God, the thought of it. Like the little bedside lockers with like, there's like little whiskey bottle and then the holy statue and then a little Lucozade bottle of holy water on it and the Bible, and it's just...
And that's the thing. So what is it about it? Like, I always think as well, I love all the, like, I suppose the religious paraphernalia that you find in the older houses as well. What is it about that makes you emotional? Is it that it's a snapshot of somebody's life? Or is it more to do with, like, can you explain to me what makes you emotional about it?
That's a good question. I don't know what it is. Is it that it's kind of a snapshot of life in general in an older time in Ireland? You know, that maybe it kind of... You see, I see kind of a lot of the time, I suppose history in Ireland is very much written, you know, from the point of view of like wars and, you know, who ruled who and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And really, I find like a lot of focus is put on big landed estates in Ireland and stuff. And this is very much, oh, let's all go visit them. Let's all put the money into them. And I think walking into a house like that tells a lot more about our history than walking into a landed estate and looking at how the gentry lived, when this is actually how like my great granny lived and your great granny lived. And this is, it's just, and a lot of the time it's like there's people in these houses, when these houses have stuff left in them and it's still quite intact, there's a very good chance that someone was living in that up until the last 5 years. And that's so heartbreaking, because I've so many soft people going, I can't live in a house like that. And I'm like, an 85-year-old man was living in that on his own and surviving. You know, you can do this. You're too soft. Everyone's too soft nowadays. So I don't know whether... I'd say it's probably honestly a combination of them. It's a combination of seeing what our history was like back in the day and seeing how people lived, because it's very much a very kind of a humble, real history, as opposed to just Michael Collins did this and this is this house. You know, it's like
day-to-day history.
Yeah, which I quite like. I'm very nostalgic, in case you didn't notice. I'm very
I noticed that,
very sentimental. I don't know where I get it from. I honestly don't know what it is. I know my granny was very like, I had a granny on the Molloy side, and she would like take stuff like where we would go down to her when we were younger, and she had like just this pigsty, which was like a little outbuilding, and she called it the pigsty, but it was like there was no pigs in it. And it was full of bags of clothes and things people had given her to give to people. And on any day when you were down there, a random person would come in and go, oh, what's her name needs this for a girl that's going off to college, and Granny was constantly, oh, I have that in a press, and you'd go into her house and you'd go, brilliant. How does she know where anything is? And she was all of about 4 foot nothing, and she'd be stuck in a press. And that's what I grew up with. I grew up with her being like, nothing is wasted, and people who need things need to be given stuff when they need it, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go donate stuff to the St. Vincent de Paul. You can just give it to her and she will find a place for it. And I think she would have probably made me very sentimental, I think, about stuff, because we kind of all really had nothing growing up. And if it was
the 80s in Ireland. Yeah.
And like I remember growing up and I was one of them teenagers that like wore vintage clothes and stuff when no one else did, and everyone thought I was really trendy, and I was literally, I got my clothes out for a pigsty.
Love it.
She'd be like, oh, there's this bag of stuff, and you'd get like, I mean, basically roller t-shirts and stuff like that, and everyone was like, where do you get that stuff?
And you're like, yeah, it's just my granny's shop.
Yeah, that's it. It's just funny. So I think it was maybe her a lot of the way. Maybe it's probably just in me.
It's lovely. Yeah, it's really lovely. I love that. And I suppose when you talk about like going into the old houses as well, do you ever get a sense of an energy of a house? So like, I've been in plenty of houses where I've walked in and I've gone, ooh, yikes, this isn't feeling quite right to me. Or, ooh, this feels so lovely. It feels like there was a lot of love and a lot of laughter in this house. Do you get that sense as well when you walk into older houses, that there's like, can be the one or the other?
Yeah, no, 100%. I 100% do. I obviously won't mention any names of places, but I've even been in places filming where I've been like, we need to get out of here as quickly as we can. I just don't really, you just wouldn't get a great feeling about it. And like, it's not a matter, like I've been in places before where I wouldn't be able to breathe properly in it. And now I go in and out of these houses every day. I don't have trouble breathing. I don't have asthma or anything like that. And I know dust doesn't affect me like that. And I literally would go into a house and I would be like, I need to get out of here. I need to get back outside. And it's just I think it kind of manifests itself in different ways with you, where it's like you could go into 100 houses and it would never happen. But yeah, like I've had places where even when I was buying this place here, where I would have looked at a lot of houses, and I've been in places even where people would have been like, oh, don't go in there because some guy lived there and he wasn't nice, and I would be totally fine. The place would be lovely. This place here, I remember coming here that first day, and my house is not a bright house. It's because it's an old farmhouse. Yeah. The windows aren't huge. And I remember the sun beaming into the house, and I remember just thinking, this is the happiest, sunniest little house in the whole world. And even, as people have come and they've kind of talked about the family that lived here, the family seemed quite stern and quite kind of, utilitarian farmer family who, not necessarily this kind of rays of light kind of a situation, but just for me, it was exactly the right place, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. And that comes into, like you said, feeling it and what is right for you and what's not for you. Have you been in a situation where, we'll say there's been an energy in a house that hasn't been amazing, but someone has gone ahead and bought it? And you're like, how do we clear that? How do we clear that?
No, because anytime I've ever had a kind of a weird feeling in a house, like I wouldn't say it.
Yeah.
But if they had went to kind of move towards buying it, I probably would have said it to them. No, I've never had anyone actually buy one. I only think I'd feel really guilty if I brought someone to a house like that, you know?
Yeah.
No, I think honestly those kind of vibes are a bit universal too. I think even if you don't believe in it, you'll just kind of be like, oh yeah, I didn't really like that house.
Yeah,
I didn't really like it. And they don't realise that there's a reason they didn't like it. Because you're going, well, it has everything on your list, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas I'd be getting the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
Well enough. Like.
Yeah. You walk outside, you're freezing cold. You're like, oh my God. And like it's 23 degrees outside. And you're like, I know, but it's freezing. Yeah.
Or something falls. I notice when I'm in a house, like if like the house is perfectly sound and everything's fine, and like something falls off a shelf or something falls like just randomly, I'm like, right, no one was at that. We need to get out of here. Right?
Yeah. That's usually a sign they don't want you there.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's okay too. That's all right too. I suppose, okay, like currently where we're at, there are whispers of a recession next year because of everything that's kind of going on in the world. What are your thoughts on that? And is it a time where people should kind of press pause on buying? Maybe they have to buy this year for whatever reasons, but any thoughts, any final thoughts on that, those whispers coming in?
Well, I mean, I suppose my opinion on it only comes from living through a recession already. And I found that when the recession hit, now I know obviously it was a very different setup last time because we had issues with banks and stuff. I get that, right? But I find that when recessions hit and when everything downturns, the banks decide they don't want to lend anymore. They kind of pull back, and that like enthusiasm for giving people money also stops. So that's always my worry. Is like, also when I was leaving Wexford, people said to me when I was leaving, you should just stay in Wexford, just wait it out. The property prices will drop. You'll be totally fine. You'll get somewhere. And they still haven't dropped. And I'm at 19 years since I left Wexford now.
Wow.
And they still haven't dropped. And I would still be renting or in my mother's spare room. And I think you have to just buy a house. Just, even if there's like a recession that lasts a couple of months or a year or two, there other stuff happens, like a recession happens, then everything else kicks in, and it becomes kind of, everyone's more frugal, and banks don't want to lend as much, and there's like austerity measures, and you don't want that either. You can't be, that puts you in a very weak position to be someone trying to get a mortgage at that stage. Like the ideal situation is that you go into a recession with the money to buy a house for cash when the houses drop.
Yeah.
That's the ideal situation. But what people tend to do is they look at like a little bit of that scenario, like, oh, when a recession comes, we'll be fine. And they don't realise that you also need to be able to get a house at that stage. You have to be in a position to buy. And at the moment, you're getting what maybe mortgage approval that lasts for 3 months. Used to be maybe 6 months.
Is that all it is? 3 months?
So like they're getting you back in very quickly, and they can change the numbers at any time they want. So that would worry me. I think if you have the money to buy now, like house prices, housing's always a great investment. There's only a certain amount of it. There's only a certain amount of land out there. Yep. Just if you can get on the property ladder now, and you get on it in a kind of a fairly frugal way, So you're not going building a 6-bedroom McMansion out in the middle of nowhere. Then look, right, great. Get yourself on the property ladder in a fairly frugal way. Don't go and borrow to the absolute hilt of anything you and your partner can get, and then complain because there's a recession in a year's time and you can't pay your mortgage. Like that's, I think you just have to have a bit of cop on, and, you know, but also buy. If you have the approval, don't just assume it's going to be there in a year. Yeah. And don't just assume something else isn't going to change. Because I would have been ruined if I had done that. Like, I'm just speaking from my own experience. If I had listened to the tire kickers that told me to wait, I still wouldn't have a house. That's kind of really the only place I can speak from, you know.
Interesting. Okay, so we're going to tie this up with what I call the Live Wild pop quiz.
It's key.
So, hang on, where did I put it? There it is. Okay, this is a quick fire round. What is your favourite cheap Irish house and why?
Probably mine. Can I say mine?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. No, totally mine. 100%, because it just, you know, I kind of didn't think at the time when I got it that it really, there was a reason for me getting it other than I needed shelter. And looking at the way my career and everything has turned out from it, it literally, my whole life got set up based on this house. So I think 100% mine.
Yay. Sending lots of love to the house.
Yeah.
We kind of answered this, but we're going to go again. Do you believe that old houses hold an energy within them?
100%. Houses, yards, sheds. If you even step foot in a garden and you don't get a good feeling, you need to walk away straight away. 100%.
Good. Okay, what do you stand for?
Probably just, like, I'm not like sustainable in that, like, I'm like, go green. I'm not like that. I don't like hang my hat on a foot. I totally agree with it, but it's just, I'm not like an eco warrior, but I feel like I don't like waste. This is a huge thing for me. I do not like waste. I was raised that way, and I feel like it down to just like, if you need something for your house, before you buy something brand new out of a brand new shop, go and see, is there even a vintage alternative that you can get that's made better, that will last longer. I hate waste. It comes into every part of my life, that I just, with everything, whether it's money, whether it's like buying things for myself. I don't buy anything. Disaster. But I just think, just don't be wasteful. I just think you can do, if you do that in every part of your life, you don't need to drive an electric car. You don't need to have underfloor heating and, you know, an air to water system. You'll make such a difference if you just stop being wasteful.
Done Deal was my best friend for about 10 years. Done Deal, charity shops and sales. I never buy anything for full price. Never.
God, no. Couldn't.
No. And that's not being tight or anything. It's just like, you don't have to.
It isn't, though. It totally isn't.
I don't think it is.
100% isn't. No, it isn't. And people see it like that. They do. They genuinely do. They kind of go, oh, you're a bit stingy, you know? And you're like, well, I'm not, though. Like, I like my nice stuff, but also if I can get like a glass juicer, like, you know, the ones where you go like that, like the little glass juicer. If I can get one of them for 20p in a St. Vincent de Paul shop, and you're charging me €5 for one in Tesco, I will go to and get it in the St. Vincent de Paul shop every time. You know,
100%.
There's not even. And they're the same. They're actually probably made better.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair, back in the day,
it eliminates the waste, but also I think, like, with the money that you technically might save on that kind of stuff, I'm like, share the wealth. I'm like, let's have a party and like invite people over and feed them or whatever. You know, that's kind of the whole thing. So I don't see it as being like tight, because I'm like, no, I want to share everything with people. You know? That's just my thing.
I like it. It's a good way to be, though.
Thanks. It's a good way to Thanks. If you were to distill yourself down to an essence, what would be your essence?
God. I do not even know what I would answer to that.
That catches everybody, actually.
It does, yeah. I don't know. I hope, like, that when I leave people, that, you know, everyone has a kind of a sense of positivity and a bit of light and a bit of hope. And I kind of hope that like, you know, I try not to be negative about stuff. You don't get through life if you're like that. And I just hope that that's kind of what maybe I leave people with, which I would really like.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, that's the sense I get from you anyway. So, what's the wildest thing you've ever done, seeing as we are on the Live Wild podcast?
Like, I don't want to be boring and say moving into a derelict house at 23 that had no front door.
No, that's kind of wild though.
Other than that, I spent a week on the Shannon last week in a boat.
Awesome.
And that was wild.
Oh, that's
I can't
cool.
swim, and it was hilarious. And I mean, I was telling my friends, they were like, "Where are you going on your holiday?" And I'm like, "I'm going on a cruise." And they were like, "Oh, Maggie." And they were like, "Where'd you go?" And I was like, "Roscommon." And they were like, "Only Maggie could go to Roscommon on a cruise."
Amazing.
Oh, it was epic. It was epic, but it was like, because I don't swim, it was a big outside my comfort zone kind of a thing. And I went with people who were very confident, but I wasn't. And I feel like that was a big thing for me. I was really proud. Oh, I loved it. It was the best thing in the world.
It's supposed
and
to be
also
beautiful.
my house.
Yeah, that and your house, 100%.
Yeah.
What's the one thing you do every day that helps you live wild and free?
Do you know, I think probably just like going out into the front garden in the mornings. Like my front yard, the lawn comes right up to my front step. And I think just going out in the morning, having a cup of tea in my bare feet, and just being able to put my toes in the grass. I'm a big one for bare feet at home.
Me too.
You know, I have like a cement path going along the side of the house, but it was there when the house was built. Like, it's so old, and the softness and the wornness of it, you can just walk it in your bare feet. And even the clay in my yard, it's just been there so long that it's just so smooth. And that to me is heaven. Bare feet, front yard in the morning. Oh, isn't that just the nicest thing?
Gorgeous. Gorgeous. I do the same thing. I step outside in the bare feet and just be like,
birds singing. It's just
yeah,
lovely.
it's
just
beautiful.
lovely.
It's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
simple. So simple. It has been an absolute joy to speak to you today. Thank you so much. It's been brilliant. I hope it really helps people who are on the property path. And obviously you're going to find much more within the TV series and YouTube, and we'll put all the links up on this. So thank you very much for your chat today.
No problem at all. It was great fun.
It was good.
It was, yeah.